Let's go ahead and get started. This is our kind of bi-weekly lunch with Doc, and I couldn't think of anybody to have on here that was more timely than Dan Gavitt, Vice President for basketball for the NCAA. And I know a lot of people will have questions, and I really appreciate Dan. I know he's got to be just overwhelmed with a lot of responsibilities that he had, but I really appreciate him doing that for us, and I think everybody will learn a lot. And Dan, it's great to have you on here. Thanks for doing this.
Well, thanks, Doc. Appreciate the opportunity. Good to see you, and hope everybody's doing well, staying safe, and hanging in there.
Yeah, well, a big, I guess the next month and a half for you will be kind of quite a challenge, but also got to be exciting at this time of the year with, the best, I guess, the best sporting event in the world, the NCAA basketball championship. So what are the biggest challenges you've kind of had to kind of figure out?
Well, the list is kind of endless. The health and safety protocols, without a doubt, are the most important thing, and probably the trickiest thing to organize. But we feel like we have the right protocols in place to keep everybody safe and healthy, and it'll be up to the teams to follow those protocols in order to keep everyone that way and keep the competition moving forward towards a national championship. But that's probably the most complicated thing, Doc. I did a couple things I can just share, kind of opening, and I want to just use the time that we have to answer any questions that anybody might have about any topics. But a couple notes that I made. One is, you may have just seen in the last hour, we announced attendance, a limited attendance for the men's championship in Indianapolis. If you didn't see it, we're going to be able to have up to 25% capacity for all rounds of the tournament, for all 67 games in Indianapolis, as we kind of decided with the basketball committee, of course, but most importantly with the local health officials here in Marion County and Tippecanoe County and Monroe County, where all the games will be held. But I think it's important to note a couple things, subtleties around that for those of you in the membership as well. It's very intentional. It's up to 25% because there will be some facilities that won't even come close to 25%. It'll all be dependent upon keeping 6 feet of physical distancing in the arena, and depending on the setup of the arena and the ticket manifest, that will mean that some facilities will have probably 10% capacity and some will have 17% capacity. And when we get to Lucas Oil Stadium, it'll approach closer to 25% capacity because of the size of that venue. But that'll include all student athletes, coaches, staff as well. And so there's great variability in that figure, depending on the venue setup and the local health officials. And in fact, at IU in Bloomington, there'll only be a maximum of 500 fans, which will be inclusive of the 400 player and official travel party guests. So there's official travel parties 34. That includes all student athletes, coaches, staff for each institution. And guaranteed for each game of the 67 for the men's and women's championships, there will be 6 guests per member of the official travel parties. That's 204 per team for each game, 408 the 2 teams combined. And at IU, for example, they're going to have an additional 100 vaccinated healthcare workers that will be able to be in attendance to those games. So there is great variability in that figure, just based on the local health authorities and the institutions and what they're comfortable with, and we obviously respect those decisions. The women's championship attendance announcement will be made later this afternoon, so I'll let you read that when it comes out, but it'll be fairly similar, especially in the later rounds of the tournament when we're in the Alamo Dome within the larger venue. There's still the guarantee that those official travel party family members and guests will be able to attend every women's game in San Antonio, but there will be significant limitations in addition to that in some venues, given the size of them, and probably not even approach 25% in the Alamo Dome, as we've kind of worked out with Bexar County, which is the location of San Antonio. So Good news, I think. Hopefully that's well received by the membership. We're hopeful, that fans that can be local or travel safely may be interested in attending. Of course, we couldn't do anything more than that. Keeping health and safety is the most important priority in all of this, but we believe that that'll be a good ad for both championships. The other thing I would definitely encourage everybody that is hoping or intending to be in either championship is, as I think you're probably all aware, we use Teamworks for the Division I men's and women's championships to communicate with primary administrators about all policies and procedures around the championships every year. But of course, this year it's even more important because there are so many new things as a result of COVID and the medical protocols. So if you haven't already done that with your primary administrator and others on campus, it can be used by as many as you'd like. I definitely encourage you to go ahead and register. We've now, for the last several weeks, been releasing information on a weekly basis on Fridays generally. So there'll be more information coming out today. It's very detailed and very helpful in planning for travel and the experience in Indianapolis and San Antonio. And really important, frankly, for those of you that definitely will be in the tournament or hope to be, in order to to have all the information to make the decisions on the official travel party, on anything and everything having to do with the championship. So I certainly encourage that. It's done by PowerPoint and video, so it's archived, so you don't have to watch it in a appointed time. But there's great information there and much more detail than I can go into during our time here, for example. And the last thing I had, Doc, and then I'll just open it up for questions, is about the NIT. I know there's a lot of interest in the NIT. We are planning on having the NIT. It will be not a full field of 32. It will be reduced. It will not be 32 teams this year, but we're looking forward to having a championship in partnership with ESPN, and we will announce more information on that probably early next week.
Wow, that's great. I wondered about the NIT. Well, that's great. You guys are going ahead with that. So I think that'll give a lot of student athletes an opportunity to have that postseason experience. So congrats on that. That's great. So yeah, that's great information, and glad for anybody to ask a question. I guess the one question I have is, how different do you see the basketball committee selection process? Do you think this will be a little bit different, or it'll be pretty much the same as it's always been done, although there are some clearly different situations with team playing more games, less games, non-conference games? How do you see that kind of playing out?
Well, I think we had the selection orientation meeting with both committees last week, and they released on Saturday for the men and Monday for the women the bracket preview, top 16 reveal. So hopefully that gave a little insight to the committee's thinking on where the top 16 teams, top 4 seed lines would be, at least at this time, if the tournament were to start now. I think there were some good examples on the men's side, for example, of teams with a different number of games played. I think that's a concern of everybody. We've got some teams that have played as many as 22, 23 games now, and some that are more at 14, 15. And I think their analysis was deep. It was very detailed. There was a significant effort made not to penalize the team that had, through no fault of their own, played fewer games than a team they may be compared to. And yet at the same time, if a team that has played more games has significant wins in that body of work, that has to be recognized as well. And so I think even in the top seed line, we had a situation where Michigan was number 3 overall seed, had played, I think at that point, 14 games due to the 2-week pause that they had. And Ohio State was behind them with 21 games or so played, or 20 or so. So I think it was a good example of how the committee is trying to be a very fair and use common sense in evaluating an overall body of work, as unequal as they may be. We're hopeful for games to continue to be played at 80+% clip, because Michigan and Ohio State play this weekend, so that'll help sort that out a little bit too. But yeah, I think they're being very thoughtful, Doc. They've watched a ton of games. Observation will certainly be part of the equation this year, as it always is, maybe even slightly more so. Analytics are still part of that evaluation also. But it's important to note it's not just the NCAA evaluation tool, the net. There are 5 other metrics that are on each team sheet. They're all utilized, in various capacities by the 10 committee members. And they're going, very deep in their evaluation of at-large teams, and then ultimately, seeding the field as well. It is challenging. I mean, we recognize that, I think, going back to last summer, it is challenging to have, kind of resumes per se that are not the same. But, I think that they're doing a great job, and it's an experienced group on the men's side in particular. And I'm confident that I know that they will put their greatest effort toward it, and I'm confident that they will make the right decisions.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Let me recognize somebody who's on this Zoom, Joe Mihalik, who has kind of taken a medical leave from Hofstra, but of course, Joe, longtime great coach, and just want to say glad to see Joe on here, and hope he's going to get back there on the sideline pretty quick. So just wanted to say that. Can you do one more thing, and then I'll turn it over to anybody else who wants to ask a question. Please, just acknowledge in the chat room you want to ask a question, but can you explain the S curve and how that's going to work this year, and if that's different or how that's going to be different?
Sure, thanks. I just wanted to add my hi to Coach Mihalik. I've been thinking about you. Talked to Jeff Hathaway recently, and definitely thinking about you. Looking forward to having you back on the bench soon, and wishing you well. The S curve, the committee did make the announcement earlier this year that they were going to use the S curve because without 4 different regions and geography not playing a part in the assignment of teams to regions, it just made sense this year to utilize the S curve. However, there are some tweaks to that need to be considered, and actually you saw it quite a bit in this week's reveal of the top 16. They haven't gone away from the principles and procedures that keep conference opponents apart, especially in the top 4 seed lines. So if teams from the same conference are in the top 4 seed lines, they are assigned to different regions. So the earliest that they could meet each other if they were to advance would be in the Final 4. And that's been like that forever. That does necessitate sometimes, rather than just being 1 versus 8, 2 versus 7, 3 versus 6, 4 versus 5, it sometimes does necessitate moving a team on a seed line, not 1 to 2 or 2 to 3, but along the 1 line, along the 2 line, the 3 line, to avoid those matchups from happening prior to the Final 4. And then there's also principles and procedures for teams seated below the 4 seed line that would allow for teams from the same conference to meet, depending upon the number of times they played that season, so inclusive of the conference championship. So if teams from the same conference played just once, they could meet as early as the 2nd round. If they played twice, they could meet as early as the Sweet 16, and if they played 3 times, they couldn't meet before the Elite 8. So when you think about 1 versus 68 and and on down, it will follow that with the contingency, or with the asterisk that those conference practice policies and will still be in place for this year as well.
One question, I guess, I know everybody needs to be tested for 7 consecutive days prior to the tournament. What happens, if people are playing in their conference tournament and maybe somebody they're competing against tests positive, and is that going to be a problem for the tournament? If that was in that 7-day window, although they may not have any positive tests, what if one of their competitors have? How will that play out?
Well, contact tracing will take place at the local level for all conference championships, or even when a team is on campus and before or after their conference championship. That is not that's not handled by Indiana and by the Marion County Health Department. It will be once teams are here, but that is handled at a local level. So it depends on contact tracing and what those protocols are, Doc, in that locale. If in Indiana, for example, when teams get here, a single positive test should not impact an entire team or even a majority of the team if big if the medical protocols are followed very carefully, those being masking at all times except when they're on the court, practicing or competing, and keeping 6 feet of physical distance. Because if there's a positive test, then contact tracing will determine whether there's been 15 minutes or more cumulative close contact unmasked. And outside of the practice court and outside of the competition court, that'll be dependent upon teams and following those medical protocols very carefully. We certainly are encouraging the same practices for conference tournaments and on campuses before coming to Indianapolis, but that'll be handled at a local level. If there is a positive test on a team or a close contact that results in a quarantine for any number of the student athletes or travel party, they will not be able to come to Indianapolis until that isolation period or quarantine period is done. Once that is done, then they will be able to come to Indy and rejoin their team. But they will not be able to travel in on that first day if they are either in isolation or quarantine for obvious, health and safety reasons. But we went to great length to make sure that in our agreement with Marion County and Bexar County and San Antonio, that travel in shouldn't result in contact tracing because we're providing the transportation, air charter or bus charter. All travel party members will be masked. There won't be any eating or drinking on that travel. And of course, 6 feet of physical distance as well. So if upon intake, there is a positive test, they won't go back and contact trace that travel period because we'll be assured that there will not have been any close contact during that time.
Great. Got a question from Rob Eson. Coach?
Dan, how you doing? Good to see you.
Good to see you too, Rob. Pleasure.
Hey, good quick question. I think a lot of coaches are curious and media people. Is there going to be a metric you feel like, gut feeling this year that could have more importance than maybe, in years past, given the craziness of what's going on? I feel, last year or the year before it was road wins. Yeah. This year, is there anything you think that could be a more important metric or afterwards that the committee looks to?
It's a great question, Rob. I think, one of the things that underlies a lot of these metrics, and it obviously also underlies how good a team really is in my mind. And I think, the majority of the committee as well, though everyone looks at it slightly differently, is offensive and defensive efficiency, right? Net of all that in particular. But, baked into the net ranking, for example, approximately half of that is a team's net efficiency ranking, and adjusted for the quality of the competition. That is a big part, as we know, of KenPom's ranking system as well, and any kind of predictive, analytic also. So, there won't be a particular emphasis on that, but if you consider that is a significant part of many of these metrics. And, like I was watching a little bit of the Gonzaga St. Mary's game last night, and, ESPN put up there's the Houston game, I think, too. There were 4 or 5 teams that were in the top 15 in offensive and defensive efficiency, and they were the teams you would expect. Gonzaga, Baylor, Houston, really highly ranked and considered teams. So, I think that underlies a lot of it, not just this year, but in general. Of course, it's quality of wins. It is always quality of wins and avoiding bad losses. But given that the opportunity for those quality wins has been impacted by rescheduling or canceled contests, that may or may not, carry the same weight as it does every year. I think about a team like St. Bonaventure, who basically, had no opportunities or very little to play any non-conference games. So, comparing them to a team that played 6 or 7 non-conference games, including some real quality ones, and got those wins, is a hard comparison. But the efficiency numbers are not as hard a comparison. I think it's always interesting. Committee members will often, talk about a team that has success, that wins tough games, close games, and they need to be recognized for that. But if they're very average or below in many areas of the game, offensively, defensively, turnovers, you name it. Like we on the team sheet as well, or on the screen when two teams are kind of compared, their statistical ranks in all categories are also put up there. And it's interesting sometimes because it very much, reaffirms committee members of, evaluation of teams. Gonzaga is an outstanding offensive team. Baylor is an outstanding defensive team. Their statistics back that up. I mean, you look at their stats, it's very obvious. When you see a team that's, that is a good team, but is really average in many, if not all categories, you start to think like, okay, how good is this team? They're obviously tough because they have a good record and they've won some close games, but it's that evaluation of, that qualitative evaluation of a team versus the quantitative that, they use all of that. It's like a big, kind of, stew that's put into the pot, and you kind of, take all these ingredients and try to evaluate a team effectively for both selection and seeding. So I hope that answers, again, this is, just my opinion. The committee members are the ones that vote. It's not me. But I think, as I look at, how they approach the analysis of one team to another or among groups of teams, because again, remember that this process, for those of you who have been through it or know, you're really comparing groups of teams. You're comparing a group of 8 teams to get to 4, a group of 4 teams to get to 2, a group of 2 teams as to who should be seated higher than another. So like past committee members have said, it's a little bit of combination of golf. If you play golf, it's like, your stroke play and then your medal play, your match play, where you're really just comparing 2 teams, and one should be higher ranked than another based on that evaluation, the metrics, the observation, everything else. But it is really broken down into small parts like that.
Dan, there's been a lot of talk in the media about, some of the really, high-ranked teams not playing in their conference tournament just to assure that, there wouldn't be any opportunity to, have positive tests. Has the NCAA basketball committee come out with any kind of statement to, schools about that situation?
Yes, great question. Certainly has been a topic of conversation in the game. The committee was well aware of that, spent the better part of 3 meetings discussing the topic and whether there was any action that they felt they should take on the matter, any guidance or indeed policy change that would address that matter. Last Friday, they released a joint statement by the 2 chairs of the committees, Mitch Barnhart at Kentucky on the men's side and Nina King from Duke on the women's side, recognizing 2 things. One, that the committees have provided great flexibility, greater than any other year, in the determination of automatic qualifiers for conferences. So the AQ policies that determine how conferences figure out their champion, either by conference championship or by regular season, and even by how that conference championship may be organized with the number of teams in the field, the format of the tournament, indeed the location of the tournament. That deadline is until a week from today. Normally, that submission of the AQ policy is a year in advance. So providing the ultimate flexibility for conferences to adjust, and many have, as we've seen, the Atlantic 10 just changed their dates of their championship yesterday. Several conferences have changed their locations. Conferences have shortened the field rather than taking all members, taken a fewer number of members. So they've taken advantage of that flexibility. And so that was a part of the statement. But the other part, which is more direct to the answer of your question, is that this has always been a conference matter. This has always been the authority of the conferences and the member institutions to determine how that plays out. And having some kind of a penalty or obligation or requirement around teams participating in their conference tournaments would require a basketball committee policy change. And, they went to some great length with my help as well, and Lynn Holzman's on the women's side of contacting conferences, talking with athletic directors, trying to figure out and assess how real is this issue of teams maybe not participating in their conference championships. And frankly, I think the feeling was at this time, at least, that the perception may be greater than the reality. that many conferences have bylaws that require teams to participate in their conference tournament. Others have certainly had deep conversations about, having everybody buy in and participate in their conference tournaments. And so I think the committee felt like it'd be a bit of an overreach to mandate something that has always been the authority of the conferences and the institutions. And excuse me, especially in light of this pandemic, where so much is volatile and dynamic and things can change on a daily basis. If a team opts out of a conference tournament, is it truly just doing that for competitive reasons? Or is there an issue that they can't release that, that may be underlying that's more challenging than just being black or white, competitive or not? So ultimately they said the committee decided to encourage teams to participate in their conference tournament, to honor the game, to honor the great sacrifice that players and coaches have made to have a full season, as well as to assist the committee in their evaluation, their full evaluation of teams. But ultimately, it's an institutional and conference decision. And should a team decide to opt out of their conference championship, that's their decision, and they in the conference will have to live with that and deal with it. But there won't be any ramifications in the selection, seeding, or bracketing process.
Let's say, heaven forbid, that one of the teams that qualified for the tournament had a COVID issue, and they just couldn't meet your criteria to come to Indianapolis. Would there be a replacement then? Would the 69th team be taken, or would the tournament just move on with somebody getting a bye?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, or probably sometime next week we will announce a replacement team policy, essentially. The men's committee has been debating it for some time and has clarity on the issue. Women's committee is meeting today to finalize their thoughts as well. I think that the committees will probably end up in a very similar, if not exact same place. And so we'll announce something next week. But a couple things. One, I think the feeling is that for having replacement teams to hopefully and reasonably have a full field before the championships start is a goal. But then secondarily, once the championships start, there will not be an opportunity for any replacement teams. Unfortunately, once the tournament is underway, should a team be impacted that and not be able to play, that will result in a no contest and their opponent moving to the next round. One thing of note too is that the playing rules of basketball require 5 eligible and healthy players to play, and that will be the standard for the tournament. So if a team is impacted, unfortunately, and they lose some number of players, as long as they still have 5 players, and that would be scholarship or walk-ons, the committee feels, I believe, that that team has earned the opportunity to play, and even if they may be disadvantaged or undermanned, they should get a chance to play.
I guess, from my standpoint, everybody's been kind of given this incredible challenge, and it sounds like, everything's right on target. So all the lodging and everything in Indianapolis has pretty much been determined, and, you kind of have slots for everybody to fit into. And is that correct?
We do, yeah. We have, so the controlled environment in Indianapolis is inclusive of 4 hotels right in downtown Indianapolis. Each team will have their own floor. All rooms will be singles, no roommates, to help with that close contact issue we talked about earlier. The 4 hotels are connected to the Indiana Convention Center by Skywalk. The convention center will be a real hub of activity. There'll be 12 practice courts in the convention center, weight rooms as well. And all teams will have meeting space in the convention center for team meetings, for film sessions, and for study hall. And aside from those areas, it'll be the competition venues that include the entirety of the controlled environment. No one in or out of that controlled environment except for those tier 1 travel party members. And that's how we imagine keeping everyone healthy and safe and making sure we can go from first 4 all the way to determining a national champion on April 5th.
That's great. One quick last question. Todd Reed has a question. It's got to be quick, Todd. Dan has got an incredibly tight schedule.
I ask how it's impacted staff and volunteers for the tournament.
Thanks, Todd, for your question. Appreciate it. You know, as you all know, it usually takes a huge village to put this tournament on at 14 sites and our host institutions and conferences. Yeah, this year is quite different. We've had to scale back significantly, you know, the staff that can be involved because of just, you know, limiting the opportunity for close contact around the court. So tier 1 individuals are only those people in the travel party, student athletes and coaches. Tier 2 would be inclusive of the basketball committee, a select number of NCAA staff. Tier 1 is also inclusive of the referees. But there are very few staff members that are around the court. Anyone that is being tested on a regular basis. And aside from that, we're scaled down significantly, even in the building, because, you know, the capacity issue, many of the things that would go on during the tournament regularly aren't going to. They will have very limited media that will be in the building, and they won't be close to the court. Even our broadcast folks will be distanced significantly from the court, radio as well. So yeah, the volunteers, you know, are limited this year, unfortunately, because we value them so much. But this year is just different on many levels. I think we'll have to keep reminding our staff, but also the participating teams. Look, I know what you think and want, and, you know, your competitive juices get going, but we're still in a pandemic, and you know, in order to pull this thing off safely and in a healthy way, it's just going to have to require adjustment and flexibility by everybody.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. You know, we are in a pandemic, so I commend you for even getting it done. That's great, but it's not going to be like your normal tournament, I guess, you know, with all the excitement and the enthusiasm, but it's going to be great anyway. So really appreciate what you've done. I know you're slammed. So Dan, thanks so much for doing this. We've recorded it, so I'm sure, you know, people have the opportunity to go back in if they couldn't be with us right now. But thanks again. Any parting words?
Yeah, thanks, Doc. Appreciate seeing everybody. One last thing I'll say, that, you know, we are still every year, and certainly this year as well, keeping the experience of the student athletes first and foremost. Obviously, this year that includes at the same level healthy safety and health. But we're also very mindful of making sure that this is a memorable experience for the student athletes. One that they'll look back on, hopefully with great memories the rest of their lives. And so we're going to great lengths to make sure that in a safe and responsible way, in their hotel rooms, in the meeting space, in the practice areas, in the competition venues, that they get the full experience that we can provide, given the adjustments we have to make for safety and health reasons.
Well, like I say, thanks for all you do. Appreciate you so much, and appreciate everybody being on here. And you know, we'll bring something together in the next couple of weeks. Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Doc. Be well, everybody. Thank you.